Welcome to Speak Up English Hub. C2 listening practice for improving your fluency in English.
Welcome back to Speak Up English Hub, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're jumping right into what is, without a doubt, the greatest unsolved mystery of the human mind. We're talking about consciousness. We're going to look at this almost like a historical cold case. I mean, ever since thinkers like René Descartes proposed that the mind and body were completely separate things, the world's greatest philosophers, cognitive scientists, and physicists have literally spent centuries banging their heads against the wall trying to connect the mind to the physical world. It is a wildly fascinating topic, and as an added bonus, it's going to give us some incredibly rich, advanced vocabulary to practice along the way.
Okay, let's dive into this. Our agenda today covers 6 key areas: the definition dilemma, searching the physical brain, the subjective human experience, explaining the hard problem, exploring a fundamental universal aspect, and we'll wrap up with challenges in cognitive science.
Starting us off with Section 1, the definition dilemma, pinning down the elusive mind. Now, what's really interesting here is that before scientists can even attempt to solve a mystery, they actually need to agree on what they're looking for, right? And honestly, this is the very first major hurdle for researchers. They're desperately struggling to just agree on exactly what phenomenon they're trying to study. Let's consider a few distinct vocabulary terms. Some scientists define consciousness strictly as subjective experience, your ability to feel sensations, thoughts, and emotions. But then others use the term self-awareness, which means your ability to reflect on your own mental states. And then you have others who define it entirely through the lens of information processing, which is simply your brain's ability to integrate sensory input. These varying definitions make reaching any sort of scientific consensus nearly impossible, because depending on which definition you're rolling with, you're essentially trying to solve a totally different problem.
Moving to Section 2, Searching the Physical Brain, the Neuroscientist's View.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core debate of our explainer today. To really get a grip on this issue, I want you to imagine an ongoing, pretty intense dialogue. Over on the left, we've got objective science. Let's say I'm playing the role of the analytical neuroscientist here. I want objective data, okay? I want brain scans, I want firing neurons, I want hard, measurable facts. I am not at all interested in poetic descriptions of the soul. But then over on the right, we have subjective philosophy. This represents our internal reality, our raw emotions, our inner feelings, the actual sensation of being alive. As the neuroscientist, my argument is that the subjective philosophy on the right absolutely must be created entirely by the biology on the left. But proving exactly how that connection works, well, that's where things get incredibly complicated.
Our neuroscientist certainly isn't giving up, though. In fact, they're making some absolutely incredible progress, using very specific analytical methods. By using fMRI neuroimaging, they can literally watch the brain in real time, identifying highly active regions like the prefrontal cortex during conscious experiences. They're also heavily studying patients with brain injuries to figure out exactly how physical damage alters a person's conscious state. And it doesn't stop there. Researchers are even observing altered states of consciousness, like the kinds you might achieve through deep meditation or psychedelics, specifically to map out the exact neurotransmitters and physical neural mechanisms that underlie those deeply profound experiences.
Which brings us to Section 3, the subjective human experience, the philosopher's rebuttal.
Now we shift away from the stark lighting of the laboratory and adopt the more wondering, contemplative tone of our philosopher. The philosopher listens to all the neuroscientists' data, nods, and then just kind of shakes their head. They argue that objectively mapping brain regions completely misses the actual feeling of being alive. It completely misses the texture of reality. Let's walk through a specific example together to really nail down the philosopher's point. Imagine 2 people viewing the exact same red apple. Let's say in step 2, our neuroscientist hooks both of them up to fMRI machines, and the scans show identical objective brain activity. The exact same neurons are firing. But then look at step 3. Internally, subjectively, one person experiences the color red as this incredibly vibrant, rich, and pleasing sensation, while the other person experiences it as kind of dull and flat. These internal, completely unmeasurable feelings are what philosophers refer to as qualia, and objective measurements completely fail to capture this subjective qualia. Sure, the scan shows the brain working, but it absolutely doesn't show the feeling of seeing the red apple.
That leads us right into Section 4, explaining the hard problem, the insurmountable gap.
This right here is the climax of our debate. It's where the objective and subjective worlds collide head-on, creating a massive hurdle for modern cognitive science.
So the crucial point is captured perfectly in this famous quote from philosopher David Chalmers. The hard problem of consciousness is the problem of explaining how and why we have phenomenal experiences. I really want our advanced English learners to isolate and focus on that specific term, phenomenal experiences. See, Chalmers isn't asking how the brain processes the light reflecting off an apple. In his view, that's actually the easy problem. The hard problem is why that mechanical processing is accompanied by an inner phenomenal experience. Why does it actually feel like anything at all to be you?
To push back against the neuroscientist's strictly biological view, let's look at a simple and honestly slightly humorous analogy from daily life. If consciousness really just arises as an automatic byproduct of complex neural networks, well, why doesn't your gut have thoughts? Seriously, your gut contains this incredibly complex network of millions of neurons, and they're constantly communicating and processing information. Yet, as far as we know, our stomachs aren't down there pondering the meaning of life. This really challenges the purely reductionist idea that if you just stack enough biological complexity and neurons together, an inner, conscious life just sort of automatically generates itself.
Let's move to section 5 and see how this builds into a fundamental universal aspect, beyond the biological brain.
Because traditional science hasn't quite been able to crack the hard problem, researchers are starting to explore some mind-bending theories outside of standard biology. In physics, we have these widely accepted fundamental aspects of the universe, things like space, time, and mass. They can't be reduced to anything else. They just exist as the absolute basic building blocks of reality. Well, there's a radical theory gaining a lot of traction lately known as panpsychism. This theory proposes that consciousness itself might actually belong in this same category. It suggests that consciousness might not just be a random byproduct of a biological brain, but rather it's baked into the very fabric of the universe itself, much like space and time. It's a pretty staggering thought, right?
And finally, Section 6, Challenges in Cognitive Science for the Modern Student. Okay, after all that lofty, mind-expanding philosophy, let's bring these concepts back down to earth. What does this ongoing, entirely unresolved debate actually mean for students who are studying cognitive science or practicing advanced English topics today? Well, here are the key takeaways. First, you've got to master defining those ambiguous vocabulary terms. Words like qualia and phenomenal are absolutely essential. Second, remember that the ultimate goal of the field right now is bridging that massive objective and subjective gap we talked about. Third, you're going to continually wrestle with understanding the true brain-mind connection. And finally, here is a very important vocabulary word for everyone at Speak Up English Hub to remember: avoiding oversimplified reductionism. Reductionism is basically the mistake of trying to reduce a massively complex phenomenon, like the beautiful, messy human experience, down to a simple, totally insufficient explanation like, oh, it's just firing neurons.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. As brilliant researchers across all these different disciplines continue to unravel this massive enigma, take a quick second to just look inward. What is the subjective, phenomenal experience of watching this explainer right now? How does the screen actually look to you? How does my voice sound inside your specific mind? The very fact that you are experiencing this at all remains the universe's most profound mystery. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep practicing, keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for being with us. See you on our next video. Let's speak up.